The DJI Action 2 came out a few months ago, and it's not just another action camera because it has a few different features that make it stand out a bit more than some of the others out there. Also, before we get started into this video, I'm going to preface this by saying I'm not someone who does a lot of extreme things or has really cool footage to show you of me going through like mountains and hiking and, you know, whitewater like whatever people do with action cams. I just don't really do that. However, I will show you some footage that people have taken with this in those scenarios, as well as just everyday use cases and kind of how I would use this camera if I was to pick one up for myself and implement it into my content creation YouTube workflow. Now, if you remember the last DJI Action Cam, then you'll know that this new version looks absolutely nothing like the last. Instead, we have this tiny little square camera that fits easily in the palm of my hand, and it has a few modular attachments that make it quite versatile. We'll get into some of the fun attachments in just a second, but focusing in here on the main unit, it's important to note that just how small and light this thing actually is. It really does give you a ton of different options and flexibility for different shot types with a form factor like this. Now, the camera itself is a 12 megapixel sensor that's capable of shooting 4K up to 120 frames per second or 240 frames per second in 1080p. This f2.8 lens has a 155-degree field of view, and overall, the sensor and image quality, it isn't going to be that much better than the rest of the competition out there, but the form factor is really what helps make this camera stand out from the rest, on top of those pretty modest specs that I just laid out. The main unit has this sensor on the front here, and then there is a display on the back that's full touchscreen, which is nice. Then on the bottom, you have the very strong magnets that help make this thing incredibly unique in terms of its modularity concept. So there are quite a few different options. There's this here additional display. So if you wanted to attach this display on like this in order to record and see yourself kind of like a vlog style. So if I'm out here, I can see myself in this camera, and if someone else is on the other side, they can see what's going on. Whenever I flip it over, I can see what's going on. There's quite a bit here to like. The other popular module is this battery module here. And what it does is once you stick it on, it will give you an additional 3 hours of battery life on top of what you already get internally. And it's also worth mentioning that both the display and the battery module have a micro SD card slot so that you can expand your storage. Now, for those wondering, internal storage on the Action 2 is 32 gigabytes. Now, baseline average for the internal battery on the actual unit itself is probably around an hour if you're shooting in 1080, or you can get an additional 160 minutes if you attach the front-facing camera module screen. Also, again, the battery module can give you an additional 3 hours of battery life. Now, the camera itself is waterproof, but once you start adding and mixing and matching some of these accessories on here, you're gonna actually need the waterproof case because it's no longer going to be waterproof. So if you do want to go underwater with this attachment on, you'll need the waterproof case that can fit the camera and either the external monitor or the battery module. Another product to note here, while not necessarily a strict module attachment for the Action 2, DJI did just release its new DJI Mic that could certainly help you with audio needs. Now, while it's not a direct attachment like I said before, it's easy to set up. It has onboard memory for up to 14 hours and it sounds fantastic. It also comes in this little AirPod style flip case and is a nice, small, but functional form factor similar to the Action 2. It's definitely something to consider if you want to use your Action 2 as more of a vlogging camera over a traditional action cam where audio might not be as important. Another cool attachment is the macro lens module that goes just right over top magnetically of the lens. And it's pretty sweet. And you can get some close-up shots with this in a nice small form factor again. And you can really get this camera into some small areas because of that form factor, making for some interesting close-up shots. Now, there's also a remote control extension rod available with this magnetic little remote built into the handle here. And the remote can let you control different shooting modes and resolution once you have it paired via Bluetooth to your camera. And the actual Action Cam just sits on top magnetically like this. This extension also flips out into a tripod if you need it. There's also a dedicated tripod accessory that DJI makes for this, as well as this floating handle that can keep your DJI Action 2 floating when shooting in water. It's also painted bright orange, so it's easy to find in case you lose sight of it when you're in the water. Another cool accessory is this necklace mount here that it's a magnet, of course, that you put on over your neck and then you tuck it inside of your shirt. Then you take this little magnetic piece here, you snap it onto the camera, and then once you got it all set up, you kind of find where it's at here on your chest, and there you go. It's attached magnetically. You know, even if my shirt is bouncing up and down, it's okay. I'm hitting it. It might fall off the harder I hit it. I mean, it's pretty good. The problem is I probably wouldn't do anything too crazy with this because it might detach relatively easy compared to using one of the other accessories. But yeah, this is pretty cool. I tested it out just kind of walking around just to see how the stabilization was, and it worked out pretty well, I think, in my opinion. You can also get some pretty cool first-person point of views to whatever it is that you might be doing. Since I'm a boring person, as I mentioned before, that really doesn't do anything fun, I've decided to show you what it's like to record a top-down B-roll set of accessories that were featured in this video. And you can see here that I've got a hands-free kind of first-person camera operation, and you can kind of see what I'm doing. There's probably plenty of other interesting ways that you can use this, but it's giving you the ability to see from my perspective what it is that I'm looking at. And so if you're interested in this camera, I'm sure you'll find better use cases, as I said before, but it's definitely a cool accessory that comes inside of the box. Now, image quality and stabilization is pretty good on the Action 2. I really think it's up there with a lot of the other Action cams that I've checked out in the past, but it might be a bit behind in image quality compared to something like the new GoPro Hero 10. There's built-in rock steady mode that does a pretty good job at reducing shake when you are, you know, running or using that magnetic mount or anything that you might be shaking the camera with. It will do its best to help improve stabilization. Now, the biggest negative about this camera that I've experienced during my time with it, because it's so small, it's not great at all at dissipating heat. In fact, it's pretty terrible at it. If you're shooting in high frame rates or higher resolutions, you can expect this camera to most likely overheat after probably 7 to 10 minutes of continuous shooting. It will turn itself off automatically, and it will definitely need some time to cool down. It's obviously better if you're outside in cooler temperatures, but when even charging this camera up through the USB port, I had both the battery module or the other module here with the display on, and if I was charging both at the same time, the units became unbearably hot, like so hot to the touch that I physically could not hold it for longer than a few seconds. It was kind of concerning. So imagine wearing that at these temperatures. It's definitely not ideal. Now, if you shoot in lower frame rates and resolution, the overheating is not as bad, but it's still possible, and the longer you record for, the more likely that outcome might happen. Overall, this form factor is kind of what makes this camera incredible, and not so great at the same time because of the overheating issue. It is a catch-22 for sure. Hopefully DJI can figure out better thermals for the next iteration, but I do really think they're onto something here with this fantastic Action cam that can do a ton of different things. But if you can't shoot for longer than a few minutes at a time before being burned by the camera physically, because it is literally so hot, it really does make it hard to recommend to a ton of people out there that might be needing to shoot for longer periods of time. But of course, I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments down below. Have you used this before? What are your thoughts on this form factor? What do you use Action cams for? Go ahead and let me know in those comments. This has been Dan with MacRumors. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you around in the next video.